This just in. Hello, I'm Matthew Lishblow on NBC Nightly News, sitting in for Brian Williams, who unfortunately could not be with us today. I'm here with big news about the kidnapping case United States v. Eveville, involving Princess Cinderella of the town of Charming, Virginia. The verdict was announced here earlier today at the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia in Alexandria. But let's first recap the events up until this point. On April 1st, 2015, Ms. Eveville, also of Charming, Virginia, was arrested on accusations of kidnapping the recently named princess of the town, Cinderella, in a plot to marry Prince Charming. She was also accused of crossing state lines from Charming into Fairyland, Maryland, and attempting to murder Cinderella via an overdose of sleeping pills. Because the kidnapper crossed state boundaries, the case immediately became federal, and it was brought to the U.S. District Court, which has original jurisdiction on the case, to determine the facts of the case and whether Ms. Ville was guilty of the crime or not guilty. Probable cause was presented to the judge in that the prosecution noted that local authorities spotted Ms. Ville lurking around the scene of the crime, which was the Royal Castle, at about 5:45 p.m. on the day of the kidnapping, which was just 15 minutes before Cinderella was reported missing. She was far enough from the castle that the authorities couldn't force her to move, but they did note her suspicious activity and recognized that the lady was Ms. Ville. They also noticed that she carried a roll of duct tape and had gloves on, despite the 70-degree weather outside. The prosecution suspected that she entered the building through the side door on the west side of the castle, that's generally kept unlocked and unguarded, and that leads straight to the princess's room. They believed that Ms. Ville had entered, duct-taped Cinderella's mouth, and promptly exited at around 5:55 p.m., dragging the helpless princess along with her. The judge ruled this probable cause as adequate to continue the trial. The judge set the bail at $1 million for Ms. Ville as the person accused of kidnapping and attempting to murder the princess. Ms. Ville could not match this high price, so she remained in jail. A grand jury then proceeded to review probable cause and decide that Ms. Ville should indeed be indicted on charges of kidnapping and first-degree attempted murder. During the arraignment process, Ms. Ville was charged with kidnapping and attempted murder, of course, and pleaded not guilty. Over the course of 13 days, the prosecution and defense presented their cases, and witnesses testified to the jury. For the prosecution, Mr. Blaine Tiff represented the United States, and Mr. Defendant represented Ms. Eveville. A number of key witnesses testified for the prosecution, including Cinderella's husband, Prince Charming, Cinderella's fairy godmother, a fingerprint and DNA technician who was considered an expert witness, the two local authorities who saw Ms. Ville snooping around the castle, and Cinderella herself. Prince Charming testified that he heard the opening and closing of the door near Cinderella's bedroom, and approximately 5 minutes after he heard the noise, he decided to check on her, Cinderella, and noticed that she wasn't in the castle at all. That is when he said he reported her as missing. Cinderella's fairy godmother, as she was always looking out for her dear Cinderella, was the one who found Cinderella in the remote cabin in Fairyland, Maryland, almost immediately after she realized the princess was in danger. Glancing through a window of the cabin, the fairy godmother spotted a silver Honda traveling quickly in the other direction towards Virginia. When shown a picture of Ms. Ville's car, the fairy godmother identified and confirmed it as indeed the car she had seen on the day of the crime. The fingerprint and DNA technician analyzed a mask possibly used to conceal the kidnapper's face that was found at the site of the crime. The DNA on the mask, he concluded, was a direct match to Eveville's DNA and fingerprint taken as part of the booking process. The technician also detected Ms. Ville's DNA on the sleeping pill container in the cabin, which held the pills that were supposedly intended to kill Cinderella, and the DNA was found on the gloves that were disposed of in a trash bin upon the kidnapper's entry into the cabin. As mentioned earlier, the local authorities verified Ms. Ville as the woman snooping around the castle and drawing suspicion by wearing nearly identical gloves to those found in the cabin and by carrying a roll of duct tape. And lastly, one of the only things the princess testified that she remembered from the event was that right when she felt the tape on her mouth, perhaps that same duct tape that Ms. Ville had been spotted carrying, and before she was being dragged on the ground, Cinderella saw the kidnapper wearing a golden pin with the initials EV carved into it, possibly standing for Eveville. The defense witnesses testified as well. Among them, Lady Tremaine, Cinderella's stepmother, stepsisters Drizella and Anastasia Tremaine, Miss Ville's brother, Steve Ville, and a mall security guard camera monitor testifying as an expert witness. The Tremaines and Steve Ville all attempted to provide Eve Ville with an alibi. Each of them testified that the four of them were dining with Eve Ville, a close family friend, at the Tremaine household at around the time the crime was committed, though they did not know the exact time for sure. These witness testimonies were clearly not compelling enough to match the evidence and testimonies presented by the prosecution, as there was no clear evidence of this get-together. In addition, they each looked nervous on the stand, and each of them had slightly different stories. For example, the Tremaines testified that for dinner they ate steak and potatoes, while Steveville testified that fish was eaten. The prosecutor grilled these witnesses and challenged their conflicting stories. Luckily for the defense, there was still one remaining expert witness to testify. A mall security guard and security camera monitor showed evidence for the defense of security cameras spotting a young woman who strikingly resembled Miss Ville, approximately an hour and 15 minutes after the princess was reported missing, a length of time the defense argues is not long enough to travel to Fairyland, Maryland, and back. This final testimony had the jury in an extremely difficult situation. But on the final 13th day of the trial, unbeknownst to the defense, a surprise witness testified to the prosecution. It was Lee Ville herself, the lesser-known sister of Eve and Steve Ville. As it turned out, she wasn't just Eve's sister, she was her identical twin. She testified that it was in fact her who went shopping that evening, not Eve. So, after about 6 hours of intense debate and discussion, the jury found Ms. Eve Ville guilty of all charges. The federal judge then sentenced Ms. Ville to 26 years in prison, combining the federal charges of kidnapping and first-degree attempted murder. Although the princess wasn't technically considered a government official, the judge understood that she was an important figure nonetheless, saying that was a key reason as to why he came down fairly hard on first offender Ms. Ville in terms of sentencing. But the case did not end there. Ms. Ville's lawyer, Mr. Fendon, was unaware of the surprise witness before she testified, and the judge allowed the witness to testify despite the prosecution being required to provide the defense with the witness list. There was wrong procedure in the district court trial, so the defense appealed to the U.S. Court of Appeals, which evidently had appellate jurisdiction on the case. The appeal was heard by this court in Richmond, Virginia. The panel of judges ultimately decided to remand the case back to the U.S. District Court, saying that the procedure followed should not have been allowed. It was required that the defense be allowed time to depose a witness. The appeals court released an opinion on the legal thinking behind the decision, saying that all witnesses available should be allowed to testify in order to help the jury decide on the most informed verdict. However, they required that the defense be able to depose the witness in order to ensure that Ms. Ville received a fair trial. So, the case went back to the district court, and after correct procedure was followed and deposition occurred, the verdict was released in this building just hours ago. Since no new evidence was found by the defense, the jury again decided on a verdict of guilty, and the judge issued the same sentencing for Ms. Ville as before, 26 years in federal prison. I'm Matthew Lushblatt, and that's all for tonight, folks. Thank you, and I hope to see you soon here on NBC Nightly News.